All right. So what's the Industrial Revolution? Who's got a great response under 20 seconds? Actually, I don't want to put a time limit on it. What's the Industrial Revolution?
People make machines that work better than doing it by hand. People make machines that do things than.
So, the Industrial Revolution, people were making things via machines instead of by hand or by non-machines.
Yeah, mass quantity.
Yeah, mass quantity, another key characteristic. Excuse me, let me cough up my lung here. The Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution, quick 411, started in Britain. For the most part, started in Britain, started in Europe. And so what happened was, via various technological advances, we became very good at doing agriculture. So we became very good at doing agriculture, so good that we didn't need humans anymore to help with doing anything with the ag. And so think about harvesting. Now we've got big old machines that can do all the harvesting. We don't need people out there. Planting seeds. Now we have machines doing it. We don't need people. And so we're producing a whole lot more agriculturally than we ever have before. And so this is in Europe and parts of the United States, parts of the Foundry here. And so because we got good at ag, no longer are people dying because of hunger. There's been a more diverse diet. And so people start living longer. And so now essentially what we've got going on is we've got a population boom. Because no longer is there a food shortage in the world. And so agricultural advancements caused population growth via selective breeding as an example of an agricultural technique, mechanization, crop rotation. So bringing science and tech to ag, we got good at producing stuff, the population grew, but there were no jobs for those people in agriculture anymore. So with population growing, now we have to make more clothes for all those people. We have to make more amenities for those people. More people means more stuff that's in demand. And so now industries start growing because now there's a population for their products. As the population of the world starts growing, well, let's crank out more stuff to meet that growth in population. And so industries then start popping up. And those industries initially were like what we call cottage industries, in which the whole idea was, like I said, making a bunch of textiles, making a bunch of clothes. So producing in mass quantities. And so that's something else that John mentioned was mass quantities. And the Industrial Revolution also happened at the same time when population was growing very, very quickly. And so it's all about meeting that population growth. So the Industrial Revolution only took place in a few areas, but it took place in areas where you have high education levels, where you've got innovators, tinkerers, people that come up with new ideas, science and tech people. And so the whole idea of technology leading the way for an economy, it's been around for a long, long time. So the Industrial Revolution helped to kickstart much of the manufacturing that we see here in the Foundry. The Industrial Revolution, for the most part, it's over. The Industrial Revolution, you could say, is occurring in certain parts of the world, i.e. China, Southeast Asia, maybe Brazil, is where the Industrial Revolution is happening now. But in the case of the Foundry, it already happened. It happened there in the 1800s and early 1900s. So the Industrial Revolution was all about meeting demands for the growing population that wasn't working in agriculture. So what did all those people who didn't have jobs, what were they doing? They were moving to the industries to work for where there was job growth, obviously. And so here we see a switch from primary sector to secondary sector. So the Industrial Revolution also corresponded with an urban migration. So people moved from agricultural areas, rural areas to cities. So cities really start to grow because there's jobs and industries in those cities for those individuals. And so now we can see and understand why and how much during the Industrial Revolution, these East Coast cities that we've talked about grew very, very, very quickly. Something I didn't mention, because I got too quick, too much in a hurry, was this question here. Philly, Baltimore, Boston, Montreal, Halifax, DC, New York City, all pretty much came around at the same spot, all pretty much in the same area of North America. Why, though, did New York City become the dominant city of North America in the Western Hemisphere? Like I said, initially, Philly was number one. Why might you think New York City became the place?
Because of Ellis Island?
Ellis Island was located there. It's a migration, but let's think just about in terms of geography.
Is it trading routes?
Well, what do you mean by trading routes?
Well, as far as being able to get into New York, as far as like a ship, it's, from what it seems like, I'm not a ship person, but it looks like it would be simpler to get a ship into New York City than having to get a ship around through Agastaries, is that what they're called?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Big, wide open harbor. These gets very, very, very narrow. It becomes a whole lot more winding route. Here, New York City, a big, wide open harbor. Look at all this area. You can go right into New York City. So first off, geography-wise, it's a big old harbor. Whereas these, much more narrow. Much more, you have to go think about DC, you go wind your way through there, wind your way, boom, you're right there. And so it had that accessibility, for sure. Another key reason.
Oh, I was going to say, like as far as in the Chesapeake Bay, I know, like, if you've ever been to Annapolis and their harbor, the whole big thing is that you have to be able to turn your boat around to get out of the harbor, and it's very narrow and it's very hard to do. So it makes sense that you wouldn't do as much shipping because you have to be really talented to get through it. The Coast Guard has to go out there all the time, and people try to this day to get out of it, and they can't.
Exactly. And so this is exactly what I was hoping people would say. And it's obvious. You can see how wide open and accessible it is. So then Ellis Island pops up, and it makes sense that migration boats take them right there. It's much easier for that transportation mechanism. Also key was the fact that New York City had access to the Great Lakes. And so these places here were pretty much, all they had access to was everything on this side of the Appalachians. Keep in mind, before rail, before cars, you're not hauling all this stuff over through the interior. So these places were, in that sense, kind of isolated, where New York City had access to the Great Lakes. And you should be scratching your head saying, wait a minute though, we learned in the map quiz that the Appalachian Mountains come right through there. So how in the heck can New York City have access to the Appalachians? I'm hoping you're scratching your head. Oh, our good friend, the Erie Canal. And so here we have New York City. So how can New York City have access to the interior, to even Chicago, whereas obviously Baltimore, D.C., and all of them, they'd have to go all the way around up the St. Lawrence Seaway and River. So what we have here is the Hudson River. And so you could then take the Hudson River, and right about here it switches to the Erie Canal, and then you can take the Erie Canal. And so New York City not only became a harbor, a nice accessible harbor for ships, you could then also penetrate the interior of the United States, which you could not do in these other cities there along the coast. And so that's key to understanding New York City, why it was so advantageous. And so maybe you're scratching your head and think, well, what about Montreal? Montreal is very similar. I mean, Montreal, you have access to the interior. Montreal, in the wintertime, the river gets icy. And so, I mean, this the whole climate thing. The fact that you're essentially got ice, you can't take the ship any further. So that's to understand, okay, why New York City is the dominant city and how it came to be. All right, so I wanted to hit that. So now we're going to try to figure out why did the Rust Belt become the center of manufacturing in North America? Something that was very much touched on by, you guys, by the Foundry people. Why here? And so this is very much geographic. And so, I know most of you are probably like, I don't need to learn all this stuff from my career. That's how most college students are. But nonetheless, in this case, we can explain geography by using this as an example. So hopefully we can understand more about geography. I hope, I pray. All right, why Appalachia? Why the Rust Belt? First off, proximity to natural resources. So being close to natural resources. And so if you're if you've got a bunch of coal, if you've got a bunch of iron ores, then that's going to be obviously very much, it's going to be, you're going to be able to dig that out and then use that for natural resources. And so being very close to those resources. Yeah, we've got some coal in Indiana, but we've got a lot of limestone. So in a particular place of Appalachia, that coal, which obviously is used for power, was very close to the surface. They're up in the mountains. So we can think about being close to those natural resources. And so Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Cleveland, Youngstown, some of these early cities, these early industrial cities are all there close to Appalachia. So that's one key thing. Second, being located near a navigable waterway. And so being close to natural resources, being close to all that coal, but also having access via waterways to then move that coal somewhere else. Then you can then take that coal and then obviously move it to where the markets demand it. So the Great Lakes, we talked about the Great Lakes, but those are obviously good examples of waterways. We talked about the Erie Canal, the Ohio River. So all those various all those various waterways were critical for shipping and moving that coal from this area, this area where it has a creamy nougat full of coal and all these natural resources that were in demand. So this is very important to understanding these two reasons for understanding the Rust Belt and why the Rust Belt grew there. Was proximity to natural resources, but also close to a waterway. Makes a whole lot of sense. All right. So when we think about Indianapolis, Indianapolis is, there's of the top 20 cities in the United States, 2 of them are not on a navigable waterway. Indianapolis is one of them. So Indianapolis is not on a navigable waterway, also Atlanta. So Atlanta and Indianapolis are the 2 largest cities in the United States that do not have a navigable waterway. And so if you think White River's navigable, go out and take a look and watch how many ships go up it, how many boats go up it. You'll see it's obviously not too navigable. And so, well, why Indianapolis? Why Atlanta? How did those places become industrial? How did Indianapolis become a part of the Rust Belt? Railroads. So railroads completely changed the game. But nonetheless, there was this legacy, this core that was left behind before rail became a dominant transportation source at the time. So we can also tie this in with migration. And so here, great stuff's happening. Natural resources in beaucoup amounts, waterways, and so industries started popping up, whether it be steel, car parts, automobiles, tires, rubber, all those various things. And so there became a demand for jobs, but a shortage of people. And so now you go back over to Europe. You go to Europe where people might have conflict with other groups in their areas. There might be civil wars occurring. There might be a potato famine. So you got all these various reasons for people to get the hell out of there. And oftentimes migrants aren't the people at the top. They're the people at the bottom or near the middle. And so they're leaving those places. And so a lot of these early migrants, they found jobs, they found employment in the growing industries here in the Rust Belt, here around these resources and waterways. And so those new migrants, we can also relate that to the Poles, the Germans, those various groups, the Irish that came over here to work in these industries. And so that helps to explain why we see once again, a very diverse ethnic population here. People coming from all different areas, and they were going there for jobs. They're going for better life. They're going to get the hell out of their local areas back home. And so their land of opportunity. So migration also plays a key role in this here. And so there's a map that kind of showcases this idea. So your map was actually better. I don't know where that one came from. But this here. So this whole idea says, okay, the blue is where you've got coal. So then you've got the areas in which they then take that coal and then they convert it to something else to make stuff, to do whatever they would want to do with it. And so the idea here is you start to see industries pop up, and Appalachia becomes an area of resources for these other areas, these other cities. And so Appalachia's kind of always served these other cities. In fact, most of New York City, if you look at New York City at night and you're wondering, well, what powers New York City? West Virginia coal. So West Virginia coal powers much of New York City today still. And so we can kind of see ways in being close to natural resources and what have you. All right. So also at the same time pops up the whole idea of an assembly line. So you start to have these big, huge factories that also dovetail or also correspond to industrialization. Once again, world population was growing, but in the United States, population was growing very, very, very quickly. And so you made a lot of money if you made something that could be sold to a lot of people. Today things have changed, so all of the idea was about getting your product to those massive amounts of people. So making as much of something as possible. It didn't really matter how much it varied. And so the great example of this is the Model T. How many colors could you get the Model T in?
Any color as long as it's black.
Any color as long as it's black. And so you could get the Model T in one color. You had no choice. But they were cranking out tons of those suckers because people wanted cars. It was a great idea. The Model T definitely changed the game. And so these assembly plants, these big, huge factories that we really don't see today, if you do see a big, huge building, it's typically a warehouse or a place to store a bunch of stuff. But in the Rust Belt, you see these big, huge, massive facilities in which an entire fleet of cars would be all produced in that one factory. And the workers, they loved it. At the time, you think, how would could you imagine going every day and sitting in the same chair for 35 years and screwing on something? It's all you did for your entire life. I would hate that. But workers love that. Think in mind, these people are leaving places in which there are no jobs or economic decline. They're just happy to have a stable job, happy to have income, happy to start accruing some wealth. And so these, at the time, workers really enjoyed and but enjoyed and were interested and attracted to working in what today we would think as being, that's the last thing I want to do, is sit in the same spot my entire life, attaching a widget to a wheel or something. Like John mentioned, we had a large population growth here, and so it was all about mass, all about supplying those consumers with a particular product, all stuff I just said. And so the focus wasn't on so much quality, the focus was on just quantity. So mass production was great at the time. Mass production, because you could produce a whole bunch of something and it would reach a large population base, a large consumer base. Today things have changed. We like individual things. We've got to think about how many models of Hondas there are, how many models of Fords there are. Probably 20 different models of Fords, 20 different models of Hondas. So we have all these different tastes, all these different types of cars, SUVs, sedans, coupes, roadsters, all kinds of different options today, whereas in this early time it was just all about mass quantity of a particular item. And so here's an advertisement for the Model T. I don't know, does it say that probably somewhere? Does it say the black thing? Huh? What's that?
It's like the famous name from
I can't hear. I got bad hearing. But here is in Detroit or Highland Park. So this is the Crystal Palace, and so this at the time was seen as innovative. This is why the United States became the global economic superpower after and throughout much of the 20th century. Is we were innovators at making stuff. And so this whole idea of having a big, huge facility in which everything was made in that one facility was very much critical to our economic success in the 20th century. Why our stuff was in demand and going all throughout the world. So we were cranking out a ton of stuff. So like I said, the assembly line, mass production, here's the very first ever facility. And so here's your life, doing nothing but the same thing for your entire life. Let's go to a place called Steelton. And see, what do you think they specialized in?
Iron.
Steel. But here we see a navigable waterway. So the idea here, what I'm trying to get at here was Steel Town. had all of their eggs in the steel basket. And so what we have here is the rail yard. This picture came out fuzzy. But we've got some mills here, and some various mills that do different things with the steel, to make the steel. We got power plants to run the facility. We've got various maintenance shops, storage yards, places to store all the steel, rail lines, worker homes. What happens when the steel industry becomes no longer in demand?
Probably a pretty empty city now.
It affects everything. And so all of their eggs are in the steel basket. So you can imagine all these various places are affected by the decline in steel. And so here, you can think about all of their eggs are in the steel basket. As steel goes, so do they. And that's a characteristic of much of this whole Rust Belt area, is a lot of these cities specialized in one particular thing, making or producing one particular thing. When that one particular thing no longer is in demand or declines in demand, you can see the impact on these places. See Detroit. So Detroit, obviously their big thing, cars. So the global automobile manufacturer, it's all changed. So Detroit doesn't matter as much. And so that's why Detroit is decaying. That's why Detroit is hollowing out, is because all its eggs were in the automotive basket. As that went, so did they. So it's a key thing I really wanted to try to get at here, was the idea of how this plant closing down is more than just this area closing down. It's obviously going to affect the entire area, area that surrounds it. So why did deindustrialization occur in the Rust Belt after the 1960s? So deindustrialization, if you don't know that term, deindustrialization is simply the loss or the migration, the outmigration of manufacturing and industry jobs in a particular area. In Indiana, Kokomo, Anderson, Muncie have been hit hard with deindustrialization. Anybody from Anderson? Or anyone want to answer this question? Why deindustrialization starting in the 1960s-ish? Why did it occur? Why did companies start closing plants?
Cost of labor was too expensive, so they moved.
Cost of labor. And so this is something that, you don't go to IUPY, you don't go to college to work work on an assembly line, to work at a factory. So we had too high skills. And so people here had too high skills, and so you're going to go to wherever the cheapest labor is possible. Very, very obvious, simple lesson there. And so industries found cheaper labor. First off, they found cheaper labor within the United States, but they also found cheaper labor outside the United States. Within the United States, they found the South, the Dixie area, to be attractive. Why did they find the South and or Dixie to be attractive to move an industry? So why would you move an industry from a Rust Belt area to Dixie?
High population, low education.
High population, low education, so lower skill sets. They're going to demand a lower wage. And so you could say a worker who's going to demand a lower wage could be one reason why jobs move from, or these industry jobs move from the Rust Belt to Dixie. Another reason.
Lack of weather issues. The Rust Belt has really cold, icy winters, so transportation can be an issue.
Yeah, I never really thought about that, but yeah, transportation for sure. It related to climate, different seasons. Yeah, I've never thought about that. Another reason. The South, they don't like unions. They don't like unions in the South. They're very anti-unions. Whereas in the Rust Belt, they're very pro-union. What a union means is just a group of workers that organize themselves to protect themselves. And so the idea is they don't want wages to go up to, so they want wages to be a certain price. And so let's say all of a sudden the workers are pissed off, they feel like they're working too much, they're going to demand a higher wage. And so unions became kind of a pain in the ass for these industries to deal with. Because they had to always negotiate with them. They were always kind of having these strikes they had to deal with. They said, screw all that. We'll go down to the South. We don't have to deal with any unions. We don't have to deal with any workers that are trying to organize themselves for worker rights, and then we can thus find a cheaper wage. So it's all about finding cheaper wages in the South via lower skill sets, but also the fact of being non-union. Why globally? Why do we have industries then start to go global? I'll just go ahead and beat the punchline. Same idea, cheaper labor. And so if you can pay someone to do work for 10 cents for an entire day, why not? Let's do it. So the quest for cheap labor. So that's something that's going to be happening right now in China. China is, as we speak, deindustrializing. You're thinking, wait a minute, they make all this stuff in the world. No, people who, these companies are moving from China and now going to Africa, now going to other parts of Asia that are a little bit lower income, places like Vietnam. So essentially it's the quest for cheap labor. It's the story of our lives. So we're going to continue to see stuff being made in newer countries as deindustrialization continues to occur. It's a very simple idea. You're going to go to wherever the labor is the cheapest. So once Africa starts to stabilize, Africa is going to become a key area for industrial growth because of it being very close to North America, Europe, and all those various other population sources, Middle East, but also cheap labor. All right, so let's take a look at the steel production over time. So steel production used to be just in the foundry, pretty much dominated the global market. Today, things have changed. It's much more dispersed. In fact, China and India dominate the steel industry today. So North America, you can see how it's declined. 1980s, these areas, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, North America dominated. Today, China and India dominate the steel industry. So that's essentially, in China, that steel that would have been coming from the United States, coming from the foundry, was coming from domestically, coming from within China. So if you go to a place like Shanghai, wish he would have stuck around, but Shanghai if you think about New York City, if you think about Manhattan, Shanghai increases the amount of its skyline 1 New York City a year. So think about New York City skyline. Shanghai does that once a year, adding. So we're talking huge growth. Well, those buildings aren't built with wood. Those buildings are built overwhelmingly with steel. And so China is finding a lot of that steel from within its own borders, not from North America where it used to be historically. And so now we have a situation. So deindustrialization, kind of tying in some loose ends here, big, huge facilities, massive places that no longer are needed. What do you do with them? That's the challenge. These things are eyesores. And it's called the Rust Belt. I mean, that's a pejorative term, whatever the hell that means. But it's rusting we can see the rust from this picture. I doctored a little bit to make it stand out even more. Well, this is a key concern here in the foundry. And we have another key term. These abandoned sites that used to be heavy industry are not only eyesores, but they're called brownfields. So if we can think about the toxins that are left behind, the asbestos, all the various stuff that's not good, the pollutants that are just left behind here, we could level this thing, we could somehow remove all the steel, figure out what to do with it, and make it a nice flat field. It still wouldn't be a place you would run and raise your kids. You wouldn't want your kids running around barefooted in a very much a toxic, polluted area. And so brownfield. These are one of the things. What do you do with these things? So one of the things is in Anderson. What they did was they had a few of these sprinkled throughout the city. And so as they were recruiting, I think they were recruiting a windmill, wind energy plant. They're trying to attract a wind energy plant from, I believe, Italy or somewhere. And so they had the guy come in, they had all the people come in from Italy. Before they came in, they knocked and leveled down 2 of their abandoned factories. And so that's one of the things. You have to figure out, what do you do with these big, huge relics from that industrial period of huge growth in the Rust Belt, in the foundry. And so that's something that Detroit's having to figure out. Toledo, Cleveland, much of northern and eastern Indiana. So today, we have a new way in which we produce things. It's called flexible production. It's a whole lot more efficient. I'm not going to go and explain flexible production, but the flexible production idea came from Japanese automotive manufacturers. So they completely changed the game. So as over time, people, their individual tastes, we all aren't the same. We all don't want the same thing. We start wanting individual things. So flexible production is a way in which they can tailor individual interests. So we get different color cars, different types of cars. So flexible production is the new way in which we produce things. And so it's completely changed the way in which we build facilities to produce things. So it's changed how the industrial landscape looks, and we'll come back and explain flexible production more when we talk about Dixie. All right, so here's a map or a chart showing 2010 automotive manufacturers. What I'm trying to get at here, where's the U.S.? Ford, Chrysler, there's our big three. The ones that are blinking red are all Japanese. Toyota, Nissan, Honda, Suzuki, Mazda, Mitsubishi. And so they completely changed the game. And so you can see how their change in how they produce things also reflected here in their dominance in the top 20 automotive manufacturers. So the growth of these Japanese automotive companies also declined the demand for the big three, declined the demand for Ford cars, Chevy cars, Dodge cars, which of course is key to understanding Detroit's demise, is the decline of the auto industry here. So this is a misleading chart. China produces more cars. The thing is, China produces a lot of cars, but what these are Fords, Chevys that are just essentially at the end. They put a badge on it or a logo that's not one. So they're pretty much Fords and Chevys. It's just they're a Chinese company, a Chinese little logo snap on the front. But still, nonetheless, within China, they produce a ton of cars. And so that's kind of how the automotive industry is pretty dynamic in that sense. All right. So here we have a map that shows in green places in which we have domestic assembly plants, domestic being Chevy, Ford, and Dodge, blue being foreign assembly plants. Once again, Suzuki, Toyota, Hondas, and so forth. And so we can see how the foreign assembly plants have started to relocate. Where we have the green areas is that key foundry area. The blue dots that are popping up down here are the new types of flexible production. So I'm going to come back and talk about this when we talk about Dixie, how its industry has grown and it's changed as far as its production type from one that's more flexible and one that's also foreign influence. So you have all this industry. Like I said earlier, all this industry, it's inevitably going to have environmental degradation. So we have more people here. It's going to lead to environmental degradation. I hope I showcased that with Manhattan, but also here in the case of this aerial. And so kind of imagine here we're looking from the north, we're looking south. So Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, so we're kind of in Canada and Quebec looking south down at the Rust Belt, down at northern New York, northern Ohio, and those places that have seen heavy industry. And this small glare, this is not clouds. This here is actual air pollution. So this is an area that has high quantities of air and water pollution, and that's from its historical, but continued. There still obviously is a good amount of manufacturing in this area. So this small glare showcases this key concern from air pollution. All right, so here, this is a map that shows acid rain. So acid rain map. So sulfate, wet deposition rate, just think of this as acid rain. So acid rain, what is it? Essentially, what is acid rain? I forget.
Produced from burning coal.
Burning coal, exactly. So sulfate, sulfuric. So that's going to be something we're going to see. Anytime you see that, it's related to coal. And so here we see an area that produces a lot of coal. So when you produce that coal obviously becomes, in the atmosphere. You can oftentimes see it. Well, then it gets mixed up with the clouds, or it's in the air. Well, we get a little bit of rain that then brings back down that air pollution, slightly acidic, that then can come down and slowly eat away at various materials. And so you're seeing this in particular in cemeteries, all throughout here. There are tons of these old cemeteries from the 1800s, early 1900s, in which you have no idea who the person is that has that tombstone on top of them. Why? Acid rain has slowly eaten away at that rock. So especially if it's soft rock, it's kind of susceptible. And so slowly you're seeing these cemeteries, these tombstones being eaten away. So just imagine with buildings, how it can relate to a city, an urban area the same way, just like it can a tombstone. But here's 1990 to 1994. Here's later on, 1996 to 2000. So has it gotten better or worse? Before? After? Before, after. Why is that? I know none of you were alive or probably could care about things back when Bill Clinton was around. Is because Bill came in and said, "I'm going to come in here and fix things." Was it Bill?
It's the Clean Air and Water Act. Close?
Close. Maybe. There may be some policies. There are probably some policies that were in there. Clean air, clean water. I don't know exactly when that happened. So we could say maybe there's some policy that maybe did a little bit of it. But why has acid rain declined in this area? It has to do. So deindustrialization, so this used to be heavy industry. Now it's gone somewhere else. The acid rain has actually gone down. And so the environmental, this whole kind of environmental issue of acid rain has actually benefited from the loss of jobs, the loss of industry in this area. Those are all things that have since gone somewhere else. And so you can see kind of the outcome of the industrialization and improvements in acid rain. So it's not so much policy. It's not Bill. All right, I showed this beforehand, but these are schools that have high amounts of air pollution outside their doors. And so you can see this area right through here, tons of dots. What does this mean? Clusters of schools where the air outside the building was likely to be worse than the air at Meredith Hitchens Elementary. Sources, USA Today.
Where's Meredith?
Anyone want to Google that for me?
Yep.
Meredith Hitchens. But we can see, that Rust Belt, very clear. St. Louis, some would say Iowa should be part of the Rust Belt. Iowa's it's obviously heavily breadbasket. Iowa, they're known for corn, and they're damn proud of it. But here, this area, Iowa, used to produce a lot of our washers and dryers. So Whirlpool, Maytag, there's a company called Amana. All of those used to be headquartered right here in Iowa. And so they have been hit hard with deindustrialization, as those various facilities have gone somewhere else.
Schools in Ohio.
Ohio. I wonder why they're talking about it.
Maybe it's the worst or something?
And the highest, most of which never been, yeah. So, this very much goes along with brownfields. Huh. I wonder I'd like to maybe get this article. I wonder if I can put it. Who cares? All right. Now let's go more about another environmental issue, and that's sea level rise. So this is a what-if map. So what if global sea level rose 1 meter? So 1 meter, about that tall from the ground? So if that would go up just that much, all the areas in red would then be underwater. Or obviously not completely underwater, but would then be flooded, or essentially the ocean or the estuary, whatever that waterway would be right there. You can see that affects much of the very highly populated areas along these waterways. So this is a key concern going forward, is what do you do about this? This is inevitable. There's no way you're going to be able to stop this. So we could all of a sudden change everything we're doing. The ice caps are going to continue to melt. And so this is an inevitable problem that in these places along the coastline, they're going to have to figure out going forward. But it's not just them. Obviously, New Orleans and Dixie has to figure out what to do with this as well. All right, another key concern. We've got this area, once again, has a bunch of urban clusters that are kind of all connected with each other. And so we've got a phenomenon that's been observed in which urban areas are hotter than rural places. So urban areas get hotter, especially in the summertime, obviously, than rural areas. So much that in urban areas, in the Foundry, people die from it being too hot. More people die from heat stroke in these areas than they do in Dixie. You're thinking, wait a minute. Dixie's hotter, it's warmer. Actually, more people die from heat strokes in Philadelphia, in Baltimore, in Indianapolis. And so what this here is a map that then simply, what it is a map from the sky in which they put on their thermal glasses, their thermal infrared glasses. And so military people, that's how you can see at night. So military people can see people at night because they have these goggles that show heat. and it shows body, because our bodies have heat, it shows our outlines of our bodies. And so we can essentially look at people at night through our goggles. Same idea here. So we're just looking down at Buffalo, and we can see hotter surfaces. And the hotter surfaces are showcased by white. And so essentially you can see where we see more white, where we see lighter colored within the Buffalo core. So within these very dense urban areas. But that's one part of it. I'll go ahead and ask, why are these areas so hot? Why is an urban heat island?
Lots of cars and carbon emissions.
Lots of cars.
Clay.
Concrete and asphalt.
Asphalt. Lots of things that are dark in color. Lots of things that absorb heat. So, if you're a parent, you don't send little Johnny and little Susie out in the middle of summer in a black shirt. Because they'll be super hot, they'll sweat. What color do you put on little Johnny and Susie?
White.
You put on white. And so lighter colors do a good job of cooling things. Black surfaces, all of that metal, all of those roads, all of those buildings that just essentially are rods that just store and hold all of that heat. Create a situation where temperatures are higher here. So, urban areas have higher temperature surfaces. That doesn't explain, though, it's fully why people die from heat stroke. So once again, I go back to after World War II. What happened was we had a suburbanization of people. And so essentially what happened is these inner city areas became abandoned. And so they became abandoned. Who was left here, or who ended up moving into these abandoned places? Lower income individuals. And so heat stroke, not only is it hot places, but it's also places in which you have lower income individuals. People from poorer families, older people. And so that just kind of quick idea there is, air conditioning is a luxury. And so a lot of people don't use air conditioning or refuse to. Well, I'll just leave the window open. Especially old people are very bullheaded in that regard. And so they're more susceptible to dying of heat stroke. And I can tie this into the whole idea as far as income inequality. So in the Foundry, you find some of the most wealthy, but in the urban core, oftentimes some of the poorest people in the United States. And a lot of this has to do with that outmigration that happened from suburbanization after World War II. And so this is seen in Buffalo, Baltimore. So what they did, just to kind of explain geography real quick, what we can do is we can do the thermal infrared thing. That's cool. But then we can say, okay, if anything's white, make it dark, dark, dark red. And so then we can start to make things look different by changing the colors of them. And so essentially we can do this now. So see how we just took that same map previously, now we changed it to just use variations of red. But the moral of the story is you can actually see the outline of this park. And the outline of the park is very cool. So it's obviously vegetation, shaded, so it has a cooler surface in the surrounding areas, the surrounding built environment. Very evident there. Providence, same deal. I think this also shows up Providence, another one of these estuaries, another one of these break and bulk cities, which is why I showed this one even though it's in New England. It showcases that very well. One of the maps that was used in the previous the Pechacuchit from today was this map. I don't know if it was explained properly, but this map showcases income inequality. And so what this means is the chance a child raised in the bottom fifth rose to the top fifth. So essentially mobilization upward over time. If you're a poor kid, do you have a good chance of becoming a wealthy kid? And so if you're red, nope, not much of a chance. If you're blue, there actually is a good chance. And so in these areas here, particularly out here in the Rust Belt area, you see very high income inequality. There's definitely the haves and the have-nots. So we're going to come back and try to figure out the empty quarter people. You've got to maybe use this and explain what's going on here. Why in the heck can you be a North Dakotan kid from a poor family and actually have a lot of hope and optimism, even though you're in the most desolate part of the country? So that's something to mention there. If you want me to send this to you, empty quarter people, I will. And so what this showcases, there's a good amount of income inequality in the decaying industrial American heartland. Quite evident there. So some recent patterns. Bottom 5 as far as domestic migration, states that lost the most amount of people in 2011. So all these are the bottom 5. Illinois, New Jersey, Michigan, New York. Pretty much all 4 of those are all parts of the Foundry. So we can see that there in just 2011 data alone. Further, since World War II, there's been a continued outmigration, particularly to the west. So this showcases that outmigration has pretty much been constant since after World War II. So one of the things is, who's moving? A lot of people say, oh, is Grandma and Grandpa retiring to Florida? Not really. What's going on here is young people. Young people are moving out of here. Moving out of here, going to where there's jobs available. Going to somewhere else. Yeah, there's the snowbirds going down here to retire. And so what ends up happening is, because there's a lot of young people moving out, these places have a lot of old people in their communities. Because a lot of the young people have since migrated, started families somewhere else. So you find a higher percentage of elderly in this area. And so, people who are interested in that, obviously nursing homes. So as far as marketing, there's a whole lot more elderly in this area. I'm sure stair lifts. Is that right? Stair lifts? The lifts that you can go upstairs? Chairlifts. Anyway, this is an area, I guarantee you, where chairlift sales are higher than other areas through here because of the higher percentage of older people that live there. Another list, let's just kind of see. Do we see any of our Foundry states? Ohio. Okay, let's go through. Ohio, West Virginia, Puerto Rico. New Jersey, Indiana, Pennsylvania, Michigan, West Virginia. 11 of the 20 are in the Foundry. 11 of the 20 of the places that are losing the largest losing population right now. This is 2010, 2010 are all from the Foundry. So we can see deindustrialization has also kind of kickstarted a depopulation. And so you're starting to see these things. So I went to Portage, Indiana. Portage, Indiana is a steel town right there along Lake Michigan. So there, the United Steelworkers. So here they have a building with the sign, "Bring home our jobs," kind of very much showcasing the idea jobs have gone somewhere else. And there's no doubt it's left its toll here in Portage. Anybody from this area? There, do you know where this is, by chance? So you've got about, 2 miles further is the lake. You've got a road in between that kind of goes along the lake. And it's got all those adult stores. It's got all those adult stores, but it's got a ton of factories that are abandoned. Tons of parking lots are just sitting there. So much of this area, you can see how the landscape has been affected by the loss of jobs that has occurred there. And that goes for Cleveland as well. Cleveland is my home, but I lost it. So you're kind of seeing how they, these billboards and these signs are, people are very much cognizant of the fact that their jobs are somewhere else. Finally, as we like to look at, kind of tie things up, I always like to kind of go back to the election map, because I think the election map is a nice summary of a lot of the big ideas here. So in the Foundry, we can see the Foundry is very much divided up. We've got the megalopolis area here. So key idea, urban places, they vote Democratic. So it makes sense that our urban areas along the coast, our urban areas all throughout here, most of along the waterways, Pittsburgh, are going to vote Democratic. So more urban you are, more likely you are to vote Democrat. The opposite of that, the more rural places of the Foundry, like Appalachia, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, are more Republican areas. And so a lot of this kind of goes to the rural versus urban characteristics, kind of the more agricultural-based, more resource-based areas versus areas that are more about education. Areas that have higher amounts of urban people, but also have higher levels of inequality, you could say. So you can understand the reason why the Democrats do well there. Other things going on here. This area right through here. I would argue why this election went to Barack Obama in 2012 was this area. We'll go ahead and maybe see if I can remove that. This area of Ohio. This area of Ohio stayed blue. So this area of Ohio stayed blue. Why did this area stay blue? Why were these people pretty much all right with how everything was? They didn't want to change things.
Oh, the bailout?
Boom, ding, 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 ding. The auto bailout. And so there was a policy, and the policy was there to protect the automobile industry, to try to hold off the job loss in these areas related to the automobile industry. So these people were like, all right, we feel like someone's trying to stick up for us. Now this auto bailout, let's think about it, it was strategic as far as why Ohio. Like I mentioned last time, Ohio is the key battleground state. And so the auto bailout, it was strategic as far as it's going to be something that would help a key battleground state and help kind of make sure that Ohio stayed blue. And so you can see that there, the relative to that auto bailout. Anything else I want to speak to here? These areas here, heavily red, extremely Republican. Not always have they been that way. Why are they heavily Republican? Because coal is their #1 industry. The Democratic view, they feel like, was one that would want to support other alternative uses for coal, besides coal. Alternative energy sources, cleaner coal, solar power, wind power. And so these people said, hey, that's a direct hit on our own lives here because of us being heavily into coal and it being our #1 income, our #1 job source. And so they said, hell no, we don't want a Democratic president, we want the Republican because it's going to be one that supports us. Pennsylvania, they say it's blue, but then with Appalachia in the middle there, I forget the saying, but the whole idea is you got kind of the two sides. You got the Philadelphia side, the Pittsburgh side, and then much of what they would even say is Dixie there in central Pennsylvania.